The sanctuary was silent, save for the echoes of footsteps on polished floors. Pastor Jamal Keaton stood at the pulpit, sweat trickling down his brow despite the air-conditioned chill. His hands trembled, gripping the edges of the lectern as he stared out at the packed congregation. His wife, Nyla, sat in the front row, her gaze unwavering and unreadable. Beside her, her mother, Celeste Harris, wore a calm smile, one that only Jamal knew hid a storm of secrets. The service had barely begun when the church doors burst open, Detective Myra Blake storming in, flanked by 2 officers. Gasps rippled through the pews as Myra's voice cut through the air like a blade. This was the moment it all came crashing down. The lies, the betrayal, the crimes they swore would remain buried. But secrets never stay hidden for long, especially when love, lust, and greed collide. If you think you know how this story ends, think again. Betrayal has a way of spiraling into chaos, and the truth, it's deadlier than you think. Subscribe to our channel and join us as we unravel a tale of forbidden passion, blackmail, and a plan that went horribly wrong. Jamal Keaton was the picture of a perfect man of God. Tall, charismatic, and with a voice that could soothe even the most troubled soul, he had built the church into a beacon of hope for their small Mississippi town. His sermons were magnetic, drawing in hundreds each Sunday, while his community outreach programs earned him widespread admiration. But it wasn't just the congregation that adored him. His wife, Nyla Keaton, was his greatest supporter. The daughter of a prominent civil rights attorney, Nyla was intelligent, elegant, and fiercely loyal. Together they seemed unstoppable, a power couple whose love inspired others. Their family's foundation seemed even stronger with the recent addition of Celeste Harris, Nyla's widowed mother, who had moved to town after her husband's passing. With her sharp wit and impressive wealth, Celeste quickly became a fixture in the community, funding church initiatives and hosting gatherings at her sprawling estate. Yet beneath the surface, not everything was as idyllic as it seemed. Celeste and Nyla's relationship had always been strained. Celeste's overbearing nature and Nyla's need for independence created friction, even in the most mundane interactions. Jamal often found himself playing mediator between the 2 women, easing tensions with his calming demeanor. Still, no one would have suspected that this seemingly perfect family was hurtling toward a devastating implosion. It started 6 months earlier, during one of the many counseling sessions Celeste Harris insisted on having with Pastor Jamal Keaton. She claimed she needed spiritual guidance to process her grief after losing her husband, but those sessions quickly turned into something far more dangerous. Celeste had a way of commanding attention. Her sharp features, striking gray-streaked hair, and effortless sophistication made her stand out in any room. During those private meetings, she was vulnerable, yet alluring, sharing intimate details of her life in a tone that always lingered just a moment too long. Jamal, despite his best efforts, found himself drawn in. He was no stranger to temptation. He often preached about it. But Celeste was different. She knew how to pinpoint his insecurities, his fears, and his desires in ways that no one else ever had. She saw the cracks in his armor, and with calculated precision, widened them. What began as comforting conversations evolved into fleeting touches and stolen glances. Soon, those touches turned into late-night meetings under the pretense of church business. Celeste would invite him to her home, pouring glasses of wine and talking about the pressures they both faced. By the time Jamal realized he had crossed a line, it was too late to turn back. The affair became their twisted sanctuary, a place where they could be their truest, most reckless selves. Celeste reveled in the power she held over the man who stood in the pulpit each week, preaching fidelity and virtue. Jamal, on the other hand, wrestled with guilt, praying for strength, but finding himself returning to her over and over again. At home, Nyla began to sense something was off. Jamal's once steady gaze often avoided hers, and he seemed distracted, retreating to his office more frequently under the guise of sermon preparation. Even Celeste's demeanor around Nyla changed, her usual sharp remarks softened by what Nyla could only describe as smug satisfaction. One evening, Nyla confronted Jamal. "You've been, distant," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "Is everything okay? Are we okay?" Jamal forced a smile. "Of course, baby. Just the usual stress of the church. Nothing to worry about." But Nyla wasn't convinced. She began noticing other signs, late-night texts Jamal quickly deleted, hushed phone calls he claimed were with church members. And then there was her mother's newfound interest in church affairs, attending meetings she'd once dismissed as beneath her. The seeds of suspicion were planted, and Nyla's intuition told her something wasn't right. But even in her wildest thoughts, she couldn't have imagined the depths of betrayal lurking just beneath the surface of her perfect life. Jamal Keaton wasn't the only one hiding secrets in the church. Among the many souls he had counseled over the years was Marcus Price, a troubled young man whose struggles with addiction and petty crime had brought him to the church. Jamal had taken Marcus under his wing, offering mentorship and a chance to turn his life around. But Marcus wasn't looking for redemption. He was looking for opportunities. It was late one evening when Marcus stumbled upon the damning evidence. He had been loitering outside the church office, waiting for Jamal to leave, hoping to steal a quick buck from the petty cash box. Instead, he overheard hushed voices coming from the pastor's office. Pressing his ear to the door, Marcus listened as Jamal and Celeste discussed their affair in heated whispers. At first, Marcus couldn't believe his luck. The perfect Pastor Keaton, a fraud, and Celeste Harris, the town's generous socialite tangled up in sin. It didn't take long for Marcus to connect the dots. This wasn't just juicy gossip. This was leverage. A week later, Jamal received the first text. "I know about you and Ms. Harris. $5,000 by Friday, or I tell your wife and the whole town." Jamal's heart sank as he read the message. He called Celeste immediately, his voice trembling with panic. "We've got a problem," he said. Marcus didn't waste any time tightening the screws. He demanded regular payments in exchange for his silence, threatening to leak photos and recordings he had secretly obtained of their rendezvous. Jamal and Celeste scrambled to meet his demands, using funds from the church's accounts to cover the payments. But Marcus was greedy, and his demands escalated. Celeste, frustrated and furious, began pushing for a more permanent solution. "This boy is nothing but a parasite," she hissed during one of their secret meetings. "We can't keep feeding him. He'll bleed us dry." "What are you saying?" Jamal asked, though he already knew the answer. "We need to handle this," Celeste said coldly. "For good." Jamal was horrified. He had strayed far from his moral compass, but murder? That was unthinkable. Yet Celeste was relentless, painting Marcus as a threat to their very survival. "Think about your wife, your church, your reputation," she urged. "This boy could destroy everything." Backed into a corner, Jamal reluctantly agreed. Marcus, meanwhile, was growing bolder. He flaunted his control over them, showing up unannounced at Celeste's estate and leaving cryptic messages for Jamal in the church. The power dynamic shifted as Marcus toyed with their fear, enjoying his role as puppet master. But Marcus underestimated just how desperate his victims had become, and how deadly desperation could be. The plan was supposed to be simple. They would lure Marcus Price to an abandoned property on the outskirts of town, scare him into silence, and force him to delete every shred of evidence he had against them. Celeste Harris had orchestrated everything, her calm, calculating demeanor hiding the chaos brewing beneath. Jamal Keaton sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He glanced at Celeste, who sat beside him, her expression unnervingly calm. In the back seat lay a black duffel bag containing duct tape, zip ties, and a ski mask, items that turned his stomach just looking at them. "This doesn't feel right," Jamal muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Celeste's voice was sharp and unwavering. "You want to keep your life intact, don't you? This is the only way." Marcus arrived at the property as planned, his cocky smirk illuminated by the headlights of their car. "You really think you can scare me?" Marcus sneered as Jamal stepped out to confront him. But Marcus wasn't expecting Celeste to emerge from the shadows, her calm facade slipping into something far more menacing. The sight of her holding a taser in one hand was enough to momentarily rattle him. "You think this is a game, boy?" she spat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Things quickly spiraled out of control. Marcus fought back, his wiry frame surprisingly strong as he wrestled with Jamal. In the chaos, the taser discharged, sending Marcus crashing to the ground. "What did you do?" Jamal shouted, panic rising as Marcus lay motionless, his chest still. Celeste knelt beside Marcus, checking for a pulse. When she looked up, her face was a mask of cold determination. "He's dead." Jamal staggered backward, his hands trembling. No, this wasn't supposed to happen." Celeste grabbed his arm, her grip like iron. "We don't have time for this. We need to clean this up. Now." Over the next frantic hours, they worked to dispose of Marcus's body. Celeste took charge, wrapping him in plastic and using Jamal's car to transport him to a secluded spot near the river. Jamal, numb with shock, followed her instructions, his mind racing with thoughts of the consequences. Back at home, Nyla's suspicions deepened. She had noticed several unusual transactions on their shared bank account and couldn't ignore the growing distance between her and her husband. That night, as Jamal stumbled into the house looking disheveled and distant, Nyla approached him. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "You're hiding something, Jamal." Jamal couldn't meet her eyes. "It's church business," he muttered, brushing past her. But Nyla wasn't convinced. She had already started digging through his phone records and emails, uncovering deleted messages and cryptic financial transfers that didn't add up. What she found left her reeling. But she knew she needed more before confronting him directly. Meanwhile, the weight of Marcus's death began to unravel Jamal. Sleepless nights turned into restless days, and every shadow felt like a reminder of what they had done. Celeste, however, remained as composed as ever, urging him to stay focused and keep up appearances. But no matter how careful they were, some things couldn't be buried. 2 days after Marcus Price's disappearance, the town was abuzz with rumors. He was a known troublemaker, but his sudden vanishing act didn't sit well with those who knew him. And when his aunt reported him missing, Detective Myra Blake was assigned to the case. Detective Blake was a sharp, no-nonsense investigator with a reputation for solving the most perplexing cases. Her initial inquiries led her to the church, where Marcus had been a frequent visitor. She began asking questions, starting with Pastor Jamal Keaton. Jamal did his best to maintain his composure during the interview, but Myra's piercing gaze seemed to strip away his carefully constructed facade. "When was the last time you saw Marcus Price?" she asked, her voice calm but direct. It's been a while," Jamal stammered. "He hasn't been around the church lately." "Funny, because a witness places him near the church office just 3 nights ago," Myra said, raising an eyebrow. Jamal's pulse quickened. I wouldn't know about that." While Detective Blake pursued her leads, Nyla Keaton was conducting her own investigation. She had pieced together enough suspicious activity to confirm her worst fears. Jamal was hiding something. Late one night, after Jamal had fallen into a fitful sleep, Nyla unlocked his phone and began sifting through his messages. The deleted texts between Jamal and her mother were the final nail in the coffin. The tone of their conversations left no doubt about the affair. Nyla's hands trembled as she scrolled further, discovering details about the blackmail and strange withdrawals from the church's account. Her stomach churned as a sickening realization set in. Her husband and mother were entangled in something far darker than infidelity. Meanwhile, Detective Blake's investigation hit a breakthrough when Marcus's body was discovered near the river. The forensic team determined that the cause of death was electrocution, and evidence pointed to foul play. Blake's instincts told her that someone in Marcus's circle had a hand in his demise, and all signs kept circling back to the church. As the pressure mounted, Celeste Harris made a bold move. She planted a piece of Marcus's belongings in the locker of one of the church's maintenance workers, a man with a minor criminal record. Her plan was to frame him for Marcus's murder, diverting attention from herself and Jamal. But Celeste's arrogance proved to be her downfall. Detective Blake noticed inconsistencies in the evidence, and when the maintenance worker vehemently denied any involvement, Blake dug deeper. Her focus shifted to Celeste, whose cold, calculated demeanor raised red flags. Nyla, armed with the truth about her husband's betrayal, decided to confront Jamal. Late one evening, she stood in their living room, holding his phone and a folder of evidence she had compiled. "Tell me everything," she demanded, her voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. "The affair, the money, Marcus. What have you done, Jamal?" Jamal's face crumbled under the weight of her accusations. He tried to explain, to justify his actions, but every word only deepened Nyla's disgust. "You lied to me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You betrayed me, and you've destroyed everything." The web of lies was finally unraveling, and the walls were closing in on both Jamal and Celeste. Across town, Celeste Harris was carefully crafting her next move. She had spent her life navigating chaos, and she wasn't about to let one reckless mistake destroy her. But this time the stakes were higher than ever. Detective Myra Blake's investigation was closing in fast. With Marcus Price's body discovered and the maintenance worker's alibi confirmed, the focus shifted to Celeste. Blake's questions about Celeste's movements on the night of Marcus's disappearance grew sharper, and even Celeste's practiced composure began to crack. Nyla, now fully aware of her mother's betrayal and her husband's infidelity, decided she had had enough. Gathering every piece of evidence she could find, she prepared to turn it over to the authorities. But first, she needed to confront the woman who had not only betrayed her trust, but had also tried to ruin her life. The confrontation came one evening at Celeste's estate. Nyla stormed in, slamming the door behind her. "How could you?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "How could you do this to me? To our family?" Celeste barely flinched. "Don't be naive, Nyla. The world isn't as black and white as you think it is. You ruined my marriage, my life, and now Marcus is dead because of you." Nyla's voice broke, tears streaming down her face. Celeste's eyes narrowed. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Nyla did know, and her accusations hit too close to home. Celeste, feeling the noose tightening, made a desperate decision. As Nyla turned to leave, Celeste grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the table and raised it over her head. "You should have stayed out of this, Nyla," Celeste hissed. Before she could strike, Jamal burst through the door, his eyes wide with horror. "Stop!" he shouted, rushing between them. Celeste froze, the vase trembling in her hands. For the first time, Jamal saw her for what she truly was, a woman consumed by ambition and deceit, willing to destroy anyone who stood in her way. "I can't let you do this," Jamal said, his voice low but firm. Celeste's mask of calm shattered. "After everything I've done for you? After all the sacrifices I've made to protect us?" "Protect us?" Jamal's voice rose. "You killed Marcus. You dragged me into this nightmare. This was never about protection. It was about you." Nyla watched the exchange, her anger giving way to a dawning realization. Her mother wasn't just manipulative, she was dangerous. And then, the bombshell dropped. "You think this is the first time I've had to clean up a mess?" Celeste sneered. "You're not the only man who's made mistakes, Jamal. You're just the only one too weak to handle it." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Celeste had done this before, manipulated, coerced, and covered up crimes to protect her image. Jamal stepped back, his decision clear. "I'm done protecting you." The congregation at church was buzzing with anticipation. It was Sunday morning, and Pastor Jamal Keaton was expected to deliver a powerful sermon. But Jamal had no intention of preaching. Today, the truth would finally come to light. Jamal stood behind the pulpit, scanning the crowd. Familiar faces filled the pews, people who had trusted him, who had looked to him for guidance. Nyla sat in the front row, her expression unreadable. Beside her was Celeste Harris, poised and confident as always, her calm demeanor betraying none of the chaos swirling around them. Clearing his throat, Jamal gripped the edges of the lectern. "Before we begin today's service," he started, his voice steady but strained, "there's something I need to confess." The murmur of the congregation fell silent, replaced by an uneasy stillness. Jamal glanced at Nyla, whose eyes were filled with a mix of hurt and hope, before continuing. "I've failed you. I've failed my family, and I've failed God." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "For months I've been living a lie. I allowed myself to be consumed by temptation, and I betrayed the trust of the people I loved the most." Gasps rippled through the room. Celeste's calm exterior faltered as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Jamal's confession had begun to unearth her carefully buried secrets. "But it doesn't end there," Jamal said, his voice growing stronger. "I became complicit in a terrible crime. A young man, Marcus Price, is dead because of my cowardice, my choices, and for that, I will answer to God and to the law." As he spoke, Detective Myra Blake stepped into the sanctuary, flanked by officers. The congregation turned in shock as the law enforcement presence became clear. Myra approached the front row, where Celeste sat frozen. "Celeste Harris," Myra announced, "you're under arrest for your role in the kidnapping and murder of Marcus Price." Celeste's mask of composure crumbled as she was led from the sanctuary. "This is a mistake," she protested, her voice growing shrill. "You can't do this to me." Jamal stepped down from the pulpit, his heart heavy. He turned to Nyla, who looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything." Nyla didn't respond. Instead, she stood and walked out of the church, leaving Jamal to face the consequences of his actions alone. The revelations shook the community to its core. Jamal turned himself in to the authorities, providing a full confession that corroborated the evidence Detective Blake had gathered. His cooperation ensured Celeste would face justice, but it couldn't save his reputation or his marriage. Celeste's trial revealed a lifetime of manipulation and deceit. Witnesses testified to her history of exploiting vulnerable people for her gain, and the evidence against her was damning. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Jamal received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony, but lost everything else: his career, his congregation, and his family. Nyla filed for divorce and moved away, determined to rebuild her life far from the shadow of her mother and husband's betrayals. Pastor Jamal's church, once a beacon of hope, became a symbol of scandal. Attendance dwindled, and the doors eventually closed. The town was left grappling with the aftermath of betrayal, secrets, and shattered trust. But for some, the story served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even those who appear righteous can fall prey to their darkest impulses. And for Nyla, it was a painful lesson in resilience, as she sought to forge a new path from the ashes of her old life. Thanks for listening to Pastor Jamal and Celeste's story. Remember to subscribe and share your thoughts. We have more mind-blowing stories to unravel together. Until then, stay safe.